Let's go back to our top story. So an independent panel of experts probed the 2020 theft of millions at the president's Phala Phala farm and found he may have violated anti-corruption laws. The president has, among others, an option to resign or stay and face a removal process. Let's discuss what such a process could look like and what the president's options are. I am joined by Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis to tell us more about this. Dr. Llewelyn, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. So this case puts new rules to the test in South Africa. This is the first time a process of immersion being tabled and an independent panel being established has been used. Speak to us firstly about the significance of this.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. Indeed, as correctly pointed out by yourself, this is a first in this country. That being said, I think it is the pinnacle of exactly what the Constitution had in mind, and that is to ensure that democratic processes are followed and that nobody is above the law. Even our state president might find himself sometimes in troubled water, as we've seen of late. And this is exactly what this process, in terms of Section 89 of our Constitution, implies and entails. In essence, a preliminary report based on a motion that was advanced by a political party started the process, and we all know what the outcome was. And obviously, this is only the beginning of the process for the so-called impeachment of President Ramaphosa. But like you say, it is a first in the country, but I think it emphasizes the fact that democratic processes can work if it is applied correctly.
Right. Now, it's important that we remain very mindful that Ramaphosa isn't facing impeachment, well, at least just yet. But there are still questions raised on what impeachment actually entails. Help us shed some more light on this. What is impeachment exactly?
Right. We must definitely distinguish between two major processes. The first is possible prosecution, and I'm talking about criminal prosecution, which is not what we are discussing today, in essence, but that is a separate process that can obviously follow if the Director of Public Prosecutions in this country or the so-called the Hawks institute a criminal arraignment of our president, which means that he will then face consequences in a criminal court. What we have currently on the table is the so-called impeachment process. Now, what must happen is that is a process that is being envisaged in our Constitution to remove a president from power if the circumstances of such a nature that he's not considered to be fit and proper to act as the president of the country anymore. Now, it's a long process, and obviously there are a lot of requirements and prerequisites to meet before such a so-called impeachment ultimately takes place. I don't want to necessarily compare it to the American model because it's not the same, but there are obviously some kind of areas where the two actually are similar. Ultimately, the purpose of an impeachment process is to remove a person from office.
Right.
We've seen it in the instance of Makwebana, our public protector. It's a similar process that will be forthcoming, obviously.
Now, this is not the first time there's been a threat of impeachment of a president in post-democratic South Africa, rather. Now, Jacob Zuma survived an impeachment vote back in 2017 over the illegal use of public money to renovate his private residence. From your own observation, what precedent has been set here, and why so much public interest in the Phala Phala matter as well?
Yes, first of all, since you once again correctly pointed out, since Nelson Mandela was president, not one single president in our country have actually stayed on for the full term of his or her presidency. So, that being said, you have mentioned the matter of former President Zuma as a possible example of impeachment. But remember, in that situation and that instance, he was removed by his own political party, the ANC, prior to him being formally impeached and ultimately removed by members of the parliament. So once again, it's not a perfect example of a comparement. This will be a first if, on the assumption that Cyril Ramaphosa fights the matter end out regarding his possible impeachment before parliament. Your other question is, why is this very relevant, and why all the attention to the Phala Phala situation? Well, first of all, what is clear from the report, and remember this is a report based on prima facie evidence. Now, that is a very low threshold to meet. So no one ever suggested at any stage whatsoever that he is guilty of any transgression, because that takes a different onus of proof needs to be applied when determining that aspect, namely either a balance of probabilities in civil matters or comparable to civil litigation, or in the instance of criminal litigation, obviously beyond a reasonable doubt. That is not the onus and the purpose of this report. This report is a very low threshold. On first impressions, is there evidence to suggest that he might have done something wrong? And obviously, the result is that there are such evidence. Now, obviously, the crux of the matter is a possible transgression of Section 96, 2A and B, read with Section 83 of our Constitution, which implies, in essence, that where our President finds himself in a situation where there was a conflict of interest between his own personal issues, in other words, his own entities,
right,
his private business, and that of Parliament, and that of the interests of the country, in his capacity as the leader of the country, then in that instance, the Concord said, and the Constitution at numerous occasions also is very clear on it, that cannot be tolerated. You must always put your country first, and in this instance, apparently that did not happen.
Staying with the theme of firsts, this is the first time a process of a motion being tabled and an independent panel being established has been used. I mean, that alone makes it a very significant moment. How the panel interprets and even applies the law also sets a very important precedent. Speak to us on this aspect.
Right. Correctly, once again, it is a first, but remember, the panel consists of three very senior legal experts, one being our former Chief Justice. So that in itself is indicative of the quality of the report and of the panel. Second of all, even Cyril Ramaphosa, our president, correctly pointed out that he was also satisfied by the fact that this was in accordance to the Constitution and constitutional principles, and he actually also hailed the mere fact that such a panel was established and ultimately came to a conclusion. But, as you correctly pointed out, there is the possibility that they might have been wrong, in which event, obviously, the President can take the matter on a review, a possible review. Whether that will be successful, I doubt it. Because of the low threshold in the first instance, I am doubtful of the fact whether on merits he will necessarily succeed in doing so. Obviously, that will imply that he will play for time and that he will at least be able to stand his ground at the ANC Congress and the voting process that will take place in mid-December this year. Also, obviously, seeing that he is the favorable candidate to win such an election, that will imply that at least his faction within the ANC continues being the leaders in the party, which is very significant, specifically from against the persons that allegedly is out to overthrow President Ramaphosa in his own government and party. In other words, the so-called radical transformation group of the ANC. So that is a very important aspect that must always be considered. If he steps down, in terms of the stand away rule or the stand-by rule, also being implemented by Cyril Ramaphosa himself on a previous occasion, then obviously he's not going to see the end of his term. Whether you like it or not, the moment any form of arraignment in a criminal case is lodged against him, and that can happen tomorrow or next week or next month by either the Director of Public Prosecutions or anybody within the Hawk, or for that matter, any political party that institutes a private prosecution if all else fails. That will be the end of the term of our President, regardless of the outcome of Parliament processes and whatever the Parliament votes ultimately on the possible impeachment of Cyril Ramaphosa.
Very interesting you say that, and I guess in the same breath, there is also a general sentiment that President Ramaphosa should jump at the chance to even clear his name before an impeachment inquiry if he has nothing to hide, really. Now, the findings of the impeachment panel, like you rightfully said, may also be the subject of a judicial review. What other options does he have here?
Well, he can either, he can't appeal the matter because this is not one of those processes that is eligible for an appeal. It is basically an opinion, if you ask me. And the question also comes to mind whether you can take an opinion to court, whether on review or otherwise. If you're not satisfied with the opinion, you can merely disregard it. There's no need for you to go to court to set it aside. The right thing to do for Cyril Ramaphosa, if he wants to clear his name, is to maybe stand down. I'm not necessarily suggesting he must resign as president, but at least stand down for a while. Then see whether the criminal proceedings or allegations can be expedited, that he can formally be acquitted in a court of law, which will then imply that all other processes automatically falls away, because if that falls away and a criminal court finds beyond a reasonable doubt that he's innocent on all these allegations, well, that should be the end of any speculation and allegations against Cyril Ramaphosa.
Dr. Llewelyn, thank you very much for your time. That was legal analyst Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis, helping us make sense of the options that President Cyril Ramaphosa has. Of course, this comes off the back of that independent panel finding that indeed he does have a case to answer to.